Good evening, scholars. I would like to continue talking about World War I with you this evening. So we're going to pick up kind of where we left off in class last time, and um, it's with the entrance of America into World War I. We talked about unrestricted submarine warfare. We also talked about the Zimmermann Note. The Zimmermann Note being when Germany attempted to get Mexico to attack America to keep America busy in order to keep America out of World War I. The Zimmermann note or telegram was intercepted by the Brits. And unrestricted submarine warfare was Germany's use of U-boats in an unrestricted way and attacking anything and everything. A great example is the Lusitania, which we also talked about earlier in the week. So, 1917, in January of 1917, the Germans, under the advice of Admiral Holtendorf, brought back unrestricted submarine warfare and blew up one of our cargo ships. And in April, we declared war on Germany. Now, although we declared war on Germany, we did not send lots of troops until 1918. If you recall, 1918 is the end of the year. So when we talk about the end of World War I, think about that European countries had been fighting this bloody, treacherous war for 4 years, where the majority of American troops really and truly weren't present until the last 9 months of the war. So that's something to think about when we look at post-war activities and recovery, etc. So I just briefly want to talk about the Archangel expedition, this American expedition where, not broadcast, not talked about, and we sent troops in through Siberia and under the pretense that we were going to rescue these Czech soldiers. And really what we were doing is, in 1918, this was the peak of the Bolshevik Revolution, and we were trying to help the whites fight the Reds. Us being there really didn't help much. What it eventually did is it prolonged the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution occurred for a few more years until Lenin got his victory. Earlier in our notes, I also showed you the tank that was found in Russia, and it was left over from the Archangel expedition. So basically, the red that you're looking at, this is where American troops snuck in again to try and help these Czech soldiers that were being led on these death marches, but then also to help support the white armies against the red. If you're interested, there is a Daniel Craig movie called Archangel that was produced in 2005. Moving right along to the social impact of the First World War conscription, millions of men being drafted. We talked about what a big difference between World War I and World War II is the sheer excitement that these men had. And, for example, Britain didn't use conscription until 1916. Women in both wars, really, on the Western side, different in the Soviet Union with World War II. We're not talking about that today. So World War I, nurses, the women did take the place of men, and something to think about that. When we talk about gender roles, we talk about feminism, this absolutely changed the attitude about, females. And, females were able to keep the economy going while the men were away. So when the men come back, this is an issue between the two genders. What we're going to go into post-war is a change in morality. Women live differently. They think differently, and this is shown through the way they dress. They have shorter skirts, the flapper look, the sleeveless, the bobbed hair. Women were wearing makeup. Women were smoking and drinking in public. Also, big suffrage throughout most of Western Europe and, of course, America following World War I. Class distinctions as a whole, is it going to help it tremendously? No. We don't have the civil rights movement yet in America, but something to think about. Death doesn't discriminate. Think about in Europe, so a lot of the Europeans used their colonists to help fight in the war, and many of these Africans, Indians, etc., Vietnamese, when they returned home, they had a different mentality as well, and they're feeling very socially and politically aware, and it's going to really push for the movement of autonomy in those different areas. Governments throughout all of Europe and America used censorship, used propaganda against the other side. The bad guys always look like a gorilla or something like that. And again, when we think about this, it's used to keep nationalism up. It's also to keep us excited about the war. It's also to keep us hating the bad guy, if you think about that. By the spring of 1916, throughout all of Europe, not America, because again, we're not in the war yet, strikes and protesting, wanting to be out of the war. This is also going to increase, particularly in Germany. Post-World War, we're going to talk a lot about, in Germany they call them Putsch, but coup, cat putsch, beer hall putsch, multiple putsch, and again, it's just from this discontent among the people. Most of all of the European countries and even America used a planned economy. France did a great job with Clemenceau, arresting strikers and anyone who talked ill of the government or ill of the war or suggested being friends with Germany, rationing, controlling absolutely everything. Germany, I talked to you about Mr. Rathenau, the Jew who was in charge of the war materials bonds. In Ireland, Easter Rebellion 1916, this was an attempt for the Irish, we're talking IRA, to vote against, to get to revolt against this British rule. Very violent. If you listen to U2, his Bloody Sunday song has to do with this particular Bloody Sunday. Excuse me. November, Franz Joseph, what he is now faced with is, if you look at Austria-Hungary as a whole, he's the Emperor of Austria-Hungary. His different regions, which we've talked about again and again and again and again, these regions want autonomy. They want to break apart from Austria-Hungary. Important for foreshadowing what's going to come with the end of the war. Obviously, on all sides, there's deserters. And one thing I just want to throw out here about deserting, that was actually a crime. Like jail, you could not only go to jail, but you're a complete outcast to society if you deserted. I think this is a great example of propaganda. Daddy, what did you do in the Great War? It's really focusing on dads, on, are you just sitting around with your kids going to work in your suit, or are you actually doing something? Just take a look at this. I know it looks absolutely insane, but an example from Britain on what you can and cannot do and how paranoid the governments were during the war. For the ladies, we talked about this in class, and if you're not replacing a man in his job, but what can you do at home? If you have a garden, use a canner, can it, make your fruit and vegetables last. I want to just briefly start on the Russian Revolution. Basically, when we think back to the start of World War I, every single country was so excited about the war, including Russia. Tsar Nicholas II, absolutely no different from the rest. He was excited, he militarized, he mobilized. He was not prepared compared to the other Western European countries. One statistic I keep saying again and again and again, but to think about is, in the year 1900, 99% of Germans could read, 25% of Russians could read. So just such a small statistic can really highlight the disaster that Russia is in. Nicholas II is not a fantastic leader. He, in 1905, he created the Duma, which is the Russian parliament. It didn't meet many times. He distrusted it. He ruled like a very stereotypical old school czar. At the same time, his wife has formed a great close relationship with Rasputin. Rasputin is the monk and he has, gotten to trust from the Tsarina because the only son has hemophilia, and all of the doctors cannot figure out what he has. Rasputin is able to, quote unquote, cure the boy, basically, not touch the boy, wherever all the doctors are like drawing blood and doing all these things which are hurting the child. So Rasputin becomes a close advisor of of Alexandria. The nobles of Russia can't stand him because basically when the Tsar is out, leading the troops fighting in the front lines, the Tsarina and Rasputin are calling the shots. And so he's murdered in 1916, and it's a fun little story how he's murdered. The nobles had enough, or boyars as they call them in Russia, had enough, and they invite him to dinner, and then they poison his wine, he didn't die, they shoot him, he doesn't die, they beat him up, he doesn't die, and they finally tie him to a chair, throw him in a river, and he finally dies. And supposedly he had cursed the family and basically said, if you don't protect me and if you die, you will die a year within my death. And I don't know if you believe in curses, but that actually did come true. So, January of 1917, we are deep in the war. Russia on the Eastern Front is doing terribly, losing to Hindenburg and Ludendorff, the two German generals. There are food shortages. Russia's a mess. In February, called the February Revolutions, in 1917, the strikes start. The strikes are started by the females, joined by the men. You notice it says Petrograd. Petrograd, please make a note. Early 1900s, the name St. Petersburg was changed to Petrograd to make it sound more Russian. So that's where that comes from. The Tsar ordered his troops to fire at the protesters, much like, if you recall, Bloody Sunday in Russian history from January 1905 following the Russo-Japanese War. But the troops joined with the protesters, so not great. The Tsar abdicates, and what we're left with in Russia is a provisional government in March of 1917. One little fun fact for you is March 8th is kind of celebrated like Mother's Day in Russia. What's left over is this established provisional government. The first leader is Alexander Kerensky. And basically what he's attempting to do is he is socialist. He's attempting to stabilize the government. His biggest flaw that he does is he keeps Russia in the war, and he claims he's keeping Russia in the war for their honor, to keep their honor. But that's the biggest mistake he made because Russia was doing so badly. So basically what's happening, what leads to his demise are, groups that are forming on the side. There's this order in the same month. We're still in the same month, ladies. We're talking this is all in 1917. Any military officers that had any trace of loyalty, to the Tsar were gotten rid of. And what this leads to is just collapse. There's anarchy not only in the army, but there's anarchy throughout all of Russia. We're talking spreading throughout Petrograd, spreading throughout the countryside. Historians compare this to the Great French Revolution, 1789, after the storming of the Bastille, when the excitement and all that hysteria spread to the countryside of France. By the summer of 1917, we're talking millions and millions and millions of dead Russians under the hands of the Germans. So what's going on is, basically we have Lenin. And Lenin, he has, he's a extremely popular man, has a very, very big following. He is a law student. He grew up really not liking the Tsar, not liking the monarchy. His brother was killed because his brother was accused of plotting to kill the Tsar. Most of the early 1900s, he was exiled. He was writing, getting it back to the Russians, but most of the time he was exiled either in Switzerland or Siberia, somewhere along those lines. His followers were not completely, totally unified, and think of it. We're talking so many people. We have the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks are his followers. In February, the Germans help him back, and if you think, the Germans, why would the Germans do that? The Germans want him back so that he pulls Russia out of the war, and that's exactly what he does. He goes back into hiding in the summer of 1917, but what brings him back is the Kornilov attempted coup, and that's this attempted coup to overthrow Kerensky, and it was a complete disaster. This leads the perfect area for Lenin to come in and take over the Russian government. Thank you.